Well, thanks very much for coming. I know it's a February night in Minnesota. Vicki and I just came back from Washington a day ago. Had to come back here to get away from the snow. It's unbelievable out there. They don't know how to do snow. I can absolutely promise you that. They have cars, when the snow plow comes through here, it pushes the snow up into your yard or your driveway, and it makes you mad. Out there, when the snow plow goes through, it puts the snow up in your car. So they've got a problem. There's an awful lot that's going on, a lot of things in the news, and we're here to talk about any of them. We have a health care bipartisan summit that's coming up next week. We can certainly talk about that. We have presumably a jobs bill that's in the works out there. We can talk about that. We have troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. I know that's of great interest to some of you, and I hope of interest to all of you. We can talk about that. In short, we can talk about anything that you would like to talk about. This is your meeting. You don't have to ask a question. You can just tell me what you think. Or you can ask a question, and I'll do my best to answer. And instead of Chaz trying to get around with the microphone, I think if you've got something to say or a question to ask, just sort of raise your hand and we'll do it like school, and I'll try to be fair and go across the room and give you a chance to say your piece. Why don't we just get right into it? That guy think?
I got about 3 things I want to mention to you. One is the biodiesel credit bill, tax bill. It expired, and we need that biodiesel tax credit to continue the biodiesel fuel industry in Minnesota. Very important to us. One item. Second item is more for me as an individual, but it affects my business. I'm a rural appraiser with the new farm bill in section 1619 that removed our right to get information from the farm service agencies that we need to do complete appraisals. And it must be important information, because if we do it for a government agency, we can get it. But we can't get it for private people. And it affects our ability to generate the best report possible. That was my second item.
Yes, sir.
Third item, a group of us just returned from Israel on a 10-day trip to Israel. Really disappointed with how poorly the Israeli government treats the non-Jews, whether they be Christians or Arabs. It's terrible what they're doing there. When you've got 69% of the Palestinians unemployed, you're going to be having trouble. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure where to start, but if I can remember it all. I don't know about 1619, if that's what it was in the Farm Bill. No, we're going to get it before we get out of here. I'm sorry, I just don't know about that.
That's fine. We did discuss it with Colin Peterson, and he's aware of it. He's also working on it. But it's something we need to make all you guys aware of, that it gets changed to the next Farm Bill. Okay. Well, I will talk to him, and I'll talk to him about biodiesel as well. As you know, he's the chairman of the committee. The Farm Bill shouldn't be up for reauthorization in a while. Doesn't mean it's not going to be talked about, as it constantly will be. I know that Colin, as the chairman of the committee, is pushing back against the EPA regulations. I think he's right about that. It's interesting that there is some real bipartisan opposition to that EPA rule, and you've got 2 committee chairs who, under the House these days, that means they're all Democrats. Ike Skelton from Missouri and Colin Peterson are both pushing back about that. And as far as Israel, a couple of things. It's a very, very big subject, but just a couple of things I would like to point out. I thought it was not just interesting, but amazing during the horrific fighting in Gaza that you all remember a year ago, that the West Bank was quiet. And I'm not sure exactly why that is, but there are a number of factors there. I think there is a growing recognition on the part of the Palestinians in the West Bank and of the Israeli government that there's an opportunity there for them to start to come together. I know that Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke very clearly about the need to give economic opportunity
to those Palestinians. There is an American general, retired General Dayton, who is working with the Palestinians, developing a Palestinian security force, and that has the full cooperation of the Israeli government, so that you don't have the Israeli Defense Force, you know, sort of stomping through those towns in the West Bank, Jericho and others, that the Palestinians themselves can go into Ramallah and places like that. And I was over there as part of a bipartisan and bicameral trip, Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, and strong support in both bodies on both sides of the aisle for that effort. I think there's some promise there. So I understand your concern, but and we're a long way from resolving that issue, but I do think there are signs of promise, and it's showing up particularly in the West Bank. Gaza's a different issue where Hamas is concerned. And I sort of forgot. Yes, sir.
Leon Moe from Cottage Grove.
Yes, sir.
A couple questions, if I may.
Yes.
Where in the Constitution does it authorize the federal government to regulate health care?
Actually, nowhere that I can find.
Thank you. Some of our founders, particularly Washington, Jefferson, John Adams, spoke quite frequently about non-intervention in foreign affairs. What are we doing with 735 military bases globally?
I actually didn't know it was the number. That was the right number. The number of military bases globally is coming down. It needs to come down. As you may know, after World War II, we had an entire corps, for a while, 2 Army corps stationed in Germany, and that has come down, and those bases are closing fairly rapidly. So I don't know if the number is right.
It was 05 or 07 number, but if I may add.
Yeah, sure.
You were probably in Vietnam about the same time I was, and
We were both old enough, yes.
I would see written on helmets and flak jackets quite often, war is good business. God damn it, it still is. You know, how much of that money could we use for taking care of ourselves here? Why do we have to be in somebody else's business over there? No wonder they hate us.
Well, I guess I have to disagree that that's the reason that they hate us, that we're there. We're there being Afghanistan you're talking about, or any place in particular? Where are you talking about that they hate us because we're there? Korea?
If they were building bases in our backyards, would we be a little upset?
Yeah, I would be.
Okay, so why is it any different for those people to be upset then?
Well, you're talking about Afghanistan, or where are you talking
Iraq,
about?
you know,
Afghanistan,
to
Iraq.
me, Iraq is an unconstitutional situation to begin with.
Well, in Iraq, I think you probably all know that the U.S. troops are coming out of Iraq, and coming out at a pretty good pace.
And going to Afghanistan instead.
Some of them are going to Afghanistan, that's right. Nowhere near the same number, but some are going to Afghanistan. And your argument is that we should not be fighting in Afghanistan, and we should let that return to the Taliban and let it return to be a base for terrorist activity, and let them suppress women again like they were doing, not allowing women to go to schools, not allowing women to drive, that we should let that return to a base for terrorist activity? Or I'm not sure I understand your argument, sir, and what it is you think we ought to do.
Take care of our things here. You know, if it's that important to dispatch some troops someplace, put them on our borders to keep the illegal immigrants out of here. You know, why do we have to go over there and worry about what they're doing? Don't we have enough stuff going on here that we can take care of?
Well, I would argue we've been attacked by them from over there, and we need to worry about that. And I would argue, as the 9/11 Commission said very clearly, that we are at war with Islamic extremists. And we can't sit here and do nothing and wait for them to attack. I mean, it's a very worthwhile debate. I certainly have the right to debate that. But I think that we need to be in Afghanistan. And it is in our interest, and certainly in the interest of both Afghanistan and Pakistan, that we be there and not let the Taliban reestablish themselves.
We're coming up on 10 years old.
That's right, coming up.
I don't see any end in sight, do you?
I think there's some marked improvement here now. But let me just take the reverse. If we were to take your position, which as I understand it is we just leave right now, just as fast as we can, start to bring troops out, what would you expect would happen in Afghanistan and Pakistan, which is a nuclear power?
Why is that critical that we need to be the world's policeman over there? We got enough problems here.
I think that it's not a case of being the world's policeman. It's a case of looking after our own interest. And it is in our interest to make sure that Pakistan, which is a nuclear power, a major nuclear power with nuclear weapons, doesn't fall to a regime like that. And if Afghanistan falls to the Taliban, Pakistan is in real trouble. As Pakistan is important to the security in Afghanistan, Afghanistan is important to the security in Pakistan. On this issue, while we don't agree on a lot of things, I think President Obama and his team is correct. They have analyzed it. Yes, sir.
Sir, Bill Graham from Burnsville. Do you see any relationship between what's going on in the Pakistan-Afghanistan border area and the long-term security of India?
Oh, yes, sir. I didn't mean that was a little unsolicited outburst from my part. Yes, absolutely. As you probably know, the Pakistanis still look at India as sort of an existential threat to them. They have major forces aimed east to India and vice versa. And it's sometimes hard for us to look at that. I mean, we in America, we sort of look at both India and Pakistan as friends and allies, and why can't you get along? But they have hundreds of thousands of troops aimed at each other. Both of them are nuclear powers, and it's a concern. And so to the point that he was raising over here, if you have the Taliban and extremists take over Pakistan, India will feel directly threatened. So there's a real danger of major escalation, including nuclear escalation.
India has an economic and industrial base that puts Pakistan in the shadows.
Correct.
It also has a long history of relatively stable and generally effective government.
Correct.
And Pakistan doesn't.
Correct again.
And it seems to me that it's in the interest of the United States to protect the stability and the well-being of India and the parts of South Asia that are stable. And I'm not a big fan of the war in Iraq or Afghanistan. I served in Vietnam and I know something about insurgencies. Mm-hmm. I was a hearts and minds guy in Vietnam. But I do think that we have to figure out some solution to that Afghan-Pakistan border area, if for no other reason to protect India.
I take your point. I think that, again, President Obama was correct when he named an envoy to Afghanistan and Pakistan together, Ambassador Holbrooke. It's interesting that he couldn't name him also simultaneously to be the envoy to India because of that relationship between Pakistan and India. The Pakistanis wouldn't tolerate it, and then the Indians wouldn't tolerate it. But I will tell you that in every trip over there, that Ambassador Holbrooke includes India because they're very, very much aware of that relationship that you just outlined, the relationship of Afghanistan to Pakistan and Pakistan to India. And oh, by the way, if you keep going west, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, you hit Iran. And they're players in this as well. It's a very, very volatile situation. Yes, sir.
Hello, Representative Kline.
How are you?
Nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
We had a good discussion about a week and a half ago.
It's a different shirt.
And we talked about depleted uranium a little. That was the one thing I brought up. And then Bill Howard brought up the fact, he mentioned to me, I was talking to him and I said, I can't remember exactly what you said, Bill. And he said, remember I said that what we're trying to do with Al-Qaeda is like trying to hit a gopher with a hammer.
Right.
And my point about depleted uranium was that whether we should be in Afghanistan or Iraq, and when we come out of there, whatever time we come out, we have poisoned that land forever. Because we use depleted uranium, which has a half-life of 4.5 billion years. I did check it after our conversation, and it does decay through stages of a number of different elements, some of which have very fast decay, like 2 seconds. But there's the first step is a 4.5 billion year half-life. And I've heard that women in Iraq are trying to avoid becoming pregnant now because there's so many deformed babies being born. And I actually met a serviceman who had been in an aircraft releasing weapons, bombs, with depleted uranium, and he came back and he had a child, and the child was born with no skin. And he attributes that to his exposure to depleted uranium. And so I don't know who, you know, we used depleted uranium when Clinton was in office too, so this is not just Republicans. We use it in Kosovo. They have the same problem. So you've got Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan, 3 places that we have used nuclear residue toxic waste, which comes from our nuclear power plants. That is all criminal activity, and we're all part of it. I'm sorry to say we've all been engaging in a really horrendous criminal activity. And I would say that the reason that we're over there is for geopolitical power and access of our oil companies to the oil and the resources in those other countries. In Afghanistan, NATO is there, but you know who takes care of the area where the pipeline's going to go? It's all U.S. troops. That area is under our control. And Karzai was an oil man. Condi Rice was oil. There's other people in there, I don't have their names right at hand, but they're all oil, and part of it is, if you want to read the plan that was laid out, it was in the Project for a New American Century. And they outlined that for the United States to have ultimate power over this planet, kind of the thing that I learned as I was growing up that Hitler was trying to do, and we didn't do that stuff. But so that we can have power over this planet, we should build our military to the extent that neither foe nor friend will dare to counter us. And
I've taken your point before. I think everybody could hear your point.
Hi, I'm Joe Jonima, and I'm critical. So, and my statement question is, we all elected you to basically do good for us, and I'm very concerned about this. And what makes me concerned is a couple of facts. I'm getting every week the thing what says who voted for what and so on. And you have been consistently for years now voting nay on everything what we need, what we're trying to do. There must be somewhere something what you can vote for and work for, what benefits us, rather than just saying nay all the time. The second thing what concerns me is that recently there was an item in the paper what says that you have already $600,000 on your campaign chest. Now, I know us little guys, we don't give $600,000, and that money came from the banks and from the insurance companies and from that. So how can you represent our interests if you get financed by these people?
What is it that I voted no? Let's try to take these in pieces. What is it that I voted no on you think I should have voted yes on?
For instance, student loans.
What was my no vote on student loans?
You didn't support this.
I did not.
I didn't bring a list. I could have brought a list this
Well,
long.
I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about on student loans, but if you're talking about did I vote against turning over the entire student loan business, $100 billion a year, did I vote against turning that over to the government to lend out $100 billion a year that we don't have, we have to borrow from the Chinese before we can even lend it? You're right, I voted no. I voted no on a number of bills because the way it works in the House, the majority party determines what legislation comes to the floor. And I have opposed a great many of those pieces of legislation. I voted yes on a lot of things in my 7 years in Congress.
Yes, I've checked. For instance, you voted yes to name a post office somewhere after somebody. That's
yes.
the kind of votes what you have done.
Yeah, that's right. The Congress has spent an enormous amount of time naming post offices. If you need a post office name, you should bring that up. You're right. There's an awful lot of post office naming going on. As far as campaign finance, it takes, most of these congressional campaigns run at a cost somewhere between $1 million and $2 million for each side. And there are limits on how much any person can give. No corporation, no union can give at all. And so you have to raise money from a broad range of contributors. No one contributor gives even a fraction of a percent of the total cost of a bill. And that's true whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to say for so many of the issues that you have said no, I would say thank you that when you're saying no to more government, and I'm sick of living with the stigma of the party of no, and no to big government, yes. Keep more things local, downsizing government. I have real concerns, a lot of real concerns on a lot of things, but what I'd like to ask you is the trade deficit. We have lots of looming issues. The trade deficit just scares the living daylights out of me. When I look at the bigger picture, I had watched on Netflix a documentary called IOUSA, and I found it very enlightening, and it shed new light on the trade deficit and the impact not just economically, but the political power play. It gave me a perspective of how very dangerous that is. And we keep with the hyper-regulation, sending jobs, and with tax, the rich tax. My dear departed father-in-law always said, I never met a poor man who could give me a job. Now, we want to make everybody, let's bring them all down. Nobody's allowed to make money. Just keep taxing the corporations, tax the businesses. Who's going to employ the people? Do you have any ideas to get around this so that we can bring the trade deficit down, offer job, real solutions?
Well, there are a number of things. Of course, I think you need to grow our economy. And many of the things I voted no against were things that I think are hurting the economy. We have the highest or second highest, depending upon how you measure it, corporate tax rate in the world. That does not help us create jobs or grow the economy. We are carrying an enormous amount of debt. This budget alone, we're adding $1.6 trillion of deficit this year. That does not help us because we're borrowing that money. We're borrowing most of that money overseas. We need to enact trade agreements. There are 3 of them sitting out there that President Obama brought up, and I think we need to move forward to get them. All 3 of those agreements with South Korea, Panama, and Colombia are to our trade advantage. If you look at Colombia right now, we import all their stuff duty-free, and there's a duty on ours going over there. It's entirely to our advantage to get that enacted, and I hope that we will do that. But getting a uniformly lowered tax rate would help us grow the economy right now. Increasing taxes will not, and that's the problem. One of the many problems that I have with the budget that President Obama just put forward. In order to get even the $1.6 trillion of deficit, taxes are going to go up, and I think that's harmful. Yes, sir.
Just a comment. The situation we're in right now as far as an economy is concerned, we've never been there before. This is entirely different. Let's compare this to the 1930s and 40s. We came through about 11 or 12 years of depression and about 4 years of World War II. And this was rationing one way or the other, rationing because of war or rationing because of low economic activity. We released about 2.5 million men from the service, and we've got all kinds of jobs coming on. If you want to be married in a church, you waited a month and a half. The United States was about the same percentage of the world population as it is today, about 4.5%. But at that time, we produced about half of the manufactured goods after World War II, because Europe was bombed out, and Japan, and so forth. If you wanted to borrow money, you had to have 20% down on the house, and you couldn't buy a house with more than 2.7 times your annual income. We were a creditor nation. We financed World War II. Okay, now fast forward to today. We owe everybody and their cousin. We are a debtor nation, $12 trillion treasury debt. Every government program that we have is underfinanced. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, roads and bridges, military pensions, public education, everything is underfinanced. People have credit card debt, they got junk in their basements and garages they haven't paid for. Where is the demand going to come for to grow our economy? I don't see it. Plus, we're exporting jobs overseas that we'll never get back. Our standard of living, we build a lifestyle that we can't come back to simply because it was financed on excessive credit. We're never going back there again. it's going to get worse for quite a while. That's my view. Comment.
It's a very good comment. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Just to bring it back to the comments earlier about the cost of the wars, isn't it coming up, I'm trying to remember, but I thought that it was coming close to $1 trillion that we've spent since about 2001. And also with regard to the trade deficit and the debtor nation and all of the amount of money, can you give us some figures? I mean, I had heard that it was much more cost effective to secure, you know, to have Homeland Security here in terms of the return on your dollars as opposed to financing wars in other places, which I also heard have increased the numbers of recruiters for terrorism have just gone up because of our presence there. So in terms of the return on the money that we are spending to support these wars, can you give us some perspective there? How much have we spent, and how does that relate to the rest of the budget?
The largest part of the budget in spending is entitlement spending. No question about it. Medicare, Social Security, other entitlement, or sometimes called mandatory automatic spending. No question about that.
Can you give like pie chart percents or dollar numbers with these?
Yeah, I've got them. I don't think I have a chart for that tonight, but those are they're readily available, and not just from a Republican source or Democrat support. The Congressional Budget Office, the GAO, the Office of Management Budget, the Joint Committee on Taxation all have those numbers. They're pretty readily available. You can Google them up and look at the percentage of where we're spending money. It is clear that if you're going to fight, you use the armed forces, it's going to cost money. There's no question that it has. It's costing money under the Bush administration, under the Obama administration. If you maintain what I think and what we have thought for a long time is an adequate national defense force, that costs money also. It's a question of, I don't know how you put a cost effectiveness on there. Most of the experts, if you go all the way back to the bipartisan 9/11 Commission, they did a pretty good job. It truly was a bipartisan commission. It was widely embraced and accepted and extolled by Speaker Pelosi and accepted by President Bush, so it was bipartisan from the beginning, said that this threat is enormously dangerous. And they said we are at war, whether we like it or not, with Islamist extremists. And we have to go and deny them sanctuary, wherever they may be. That's how we have to fight this. And that's the approach that's been taken by both administrations. And so the idea that you can just have enough screeners at the airport and at the metro station and on buses, and that therefore we will be safe and we don't care what happens elsewhere and we don't care how strong they get, we don't care where they have training bases, I just think is wrong. I just disagree with that. And so it is worth, in my judgment, every dime that we spend to keep us safe.
But isn't it less stable over there now?
No. Colleen?
Well, the 9/11 Commission found that there was no connection between Iraq and Al-Qaeda. That was actually at the tail end of their report. They found that all of those deceptions about weapons of mass destruction, and so basically that report does not justify the Iraq war. You know, if you want to say it justifies Afghanistan maybe, but it doesn't justify Iraq. And I just wanted to add on the part about the budget. We're at 14, the debt ceiling was raised to $14.3 trillion. And, you know, you and others claim to be conservative. I hear Rush Limbaugh every 2 seconds saying, we conservatives.
You listen to him a lot more than I do.
Well, you know, what's conservative about your terms of taking $5.6 trillion, which is what Bush had coming in, to $10 trillion, and then voting for the bailout at the end of Bush's term. And I'm wondering if this $14 trillion now, which is causing great concern, certainly to lots of people, bipartisan.
Sure.
And I think it is very fiscally conservative. There's a debt commission that's just formed to look at things, including entitlements. And I know that you used to favor privatizing Social Security. So would you now favor cutting some of those entitlements in order, and possibly privatizing Social Security in order to try to get that debt to come down?
Wow.
I'm worried about that because I know that you stumped for privatizing Bush's plan back in 2005. And it is, you just mentioned, it's one of the biggest sources of the debt.
Social Security is, as you know very well, Colleen, it is a huge unfunded liability. It's nowhere near as big as Medicare in terms of unfunded liability. There is no question that both of those entitlements have to be addressed. You know very well they have to be addressed in a bipartisan way. No party can step in there and fix it. You know very well that President Bush expended his so-called political capital by saying that the system's in trouble and we have to fix it. It's not entirely clear what the Bush plan was. That was part of the problem, I would argue. He never really had a bill. He just had an idea. At one point, I went over to the White House to talk to them about this, and at that one point, there were 14 different bills in the House to address Social Security. Every one of them was different. I have said for a long time that I believe that we need to guarantee that the people who are on Social Security get every single dime that they're supposed to get. We have to look at what we're going to do, what that system is going to be, and I don't know what it is, what it's going to be for younger people. I have believed that it would be better if they owned it themselves. But whatever we do, we're going to have to sit down and address it, and there aren't many choices about what you can do. You can lower the entitlements, and the most likely way to do that is the way they did it back in the mid-'80s, and that's raise the retirement age. That's not very popular. But so we're going to have to look at something like that at some time.
More unemployment.
I'm sorry?
If you raise the retirement age, you're going to get more unemployment because those people, they're trying to work longer and we don't have jobs for them.
Well, I think you know, well, I don't know if you know, but the issue with Social Security is we have an ever smaller number of people who are working and an ever-growing number of people who are retired. That's just a fact. It's not a Republican fact. It's not a Democrat fact. It's just a fact. You know, we went from over 30 to workers per retiree to 16, and now we're just over 2 workers per retiree, and it's getting worse because my age is starting to retire. And so we're going to have to address it. There is no question about it. And my point is that when we address it, everything that we do, we've got to absolutely guarantee that people who are drawing Social Security and have been counting on Social Security are going to be able to get everything they were expecting. And Republicans and Democrats, it's going to be a tough position to take politically. You're going to have to come together and we have to decide what we're going to do to address it. Oh, yes, sir, right here again.
We're going to pay for it with inflation. That's what we're going to pay for it. We're spending, creating more money, and we're manufacturing less goods. We're going to have a lot of inflation.
You're absolutely right. And we're going to have, by the way, there's no question that interest rates are going to go up here shortly. I think you would agree with that. Even the Chinese and the Japanese won't continue to loan us money at these interest rates. So we have got a giant problem. And I wish I had a magic wand, Colleen, but you know that I don't. Yes, sir.
Well, you know, we're talking about Medicare, you know, and I guess basically it's health care. And it's a health care reform issue and such. And I don't have much of a background in healthcare and everything. I didn't work in that, but I've spent the last couple of years trying to understand it. And as I've gotten, and I will be turning 65 in less than a month, so I'm going to be getting that Social Security, which I'm looking forward to. But one of the things that really came across me very strongly is how the waste that we have in our system right now. I have a daughter that lives over in France, and I've seen how the French health system works over there, and I've read about how some of the other industrial countries are in Taiwan and Japan, and yet we have not looked at that at the federal level, very honestly, for a single-payer plan. You know, it's a plan that removes the insurance companies from being in charge of our health care dollars. You know, and it's what all these other countries have done in order to help bring down that cost. I mean, not that it solves all the problems, but it's at least a start towards that problem solution. So can you give me some ideas? Why is it? I know in particular the Republican Party has been very strong against that. Why?
I don't think it works very well. You're right that the programs we have right now are already, they're full of waste. There's no question about that. We just depend on them so much. We have millions of Americans who are depending upon Medicare, for example. And I'm not at all suggesting that we yank that away, but I'm also saying it's not a good example of how a system ought to work. It is loaded with horribly wasteful spending because it's a giant government bureaucracy that's running a healthcare program. I don't think that's a model we want to use. I don't think it's where we want to go. I think we ought to encourage more private ownership of your health insurance so that you can move with it if you lose your job. We're faced with right now, I had it up there on the stage, those two tall stacks are the 4,700 or so pages of legislation to move us in that direction. You can't see the smaller stack there, it's about this big. That was an amendment in the nature of a substitute, an alternative proposal that was put forward by the Republican parties in the House. And what you really can't see there is a single blank piece of paper, which is where we ought to go to solve this thing. This healthcare summit that we're having next week ought to be a blank piece of paper on a table. We've got Republicans and Democrats coming, the House and the Senate and the White House, and whatever other experts the President chooses to have. We ought to sit in there and say, what is it that we can agree on here? Not what is it, as President Obama said, what am I going to have to give up and what are you going to have to give up? Let's don't start there. Let's start by what we agree on. For example, do we agree that you ought to be able to get insurance with pre-existing conditions? Yes. Let's write that down. And both sides, by the way, in that huge stack of bills and the smaller bills, both parties took the same approach, at least initially, for the first several years. In the big stack, they had the government take it over. And that was putting together high-risk pools, and there's a way to do that. Do we agree that young people ought to be able to stay on their parents' insurance until they're 25 or 26 or 27? Republicans said 25, the Democrats said 27, okay, we'll agree. I'll even agree 27. Let's put that down, and so forth. Let's put down what we can agree on and go from there, and not go in and debate another 4,000-page bill. Yes, sir, follow up.
Just to follow up. I've been pretty much involved now at the state level here. We've been looking at a plan called the Minnesota Health Plan that's been going through the state and House of Representatives, and really has a lot of support building for that. One of the things I know that came up was an amendment from Dennis Kucinich in the House committee that you're with there. That you supported him on this.
I did.
To allow states, or to make it easier for states to be able to do that, to really decide themselves if they want to go with a purely public plan, and to, in some respects, use that as a test case to see how that works at something that can be used for the whole country. Will you still support that?
Right. Dennis Kucinich is the nicest man. He and I agree on almost nothing. But
so surprising.
He's a wonderfully nice man. He really is, and he sent me a really nice note after that vote. I agreed with him because his position was the states, if they want to be able to do that, ought to be able to do that. I agree. I think it'd be a bad idea for a state to do that, but I agreed with his position that the federal government shouldn't stop Minnesota or Ohio, he's from Ohio, if they wanted to do that. And he really is a wonderfully nice man. I'm not being at all facetious, he really is.
Just to finish up one thing. The one thing about the Minnesota Health Plan, it's about the size of your left sheet also there. It's 25 pages, it's on the internet as a PDF file. So it's a very straightforward plan that doesn't have all that bureaucracy in it.
Well, I just find it troubling. I mean, we can talk about healthcare all night. I'm talked about it until I'm hoarse, but there's just something fundamentally wrong with legislation that's that big. I mean, it's almost impossible to understand. I don't know, Catherine, can you still hear me? Just quickly put up the healthcare chart just for a minute. This was a chart put together by the Republican staff of the Joint Committee on Taxation. So full disclosure, it's Republican staff. That's as we first tried to understand the first tranche of this thing. Then put up put up the next slide. It got worse. It just got worse.
Do you have one that shows the public option, or do you have one where it's universal like they have in Europe and anywhere else? There's billions of people what are being insured under the government and so on all over the world, and it works for them. Why wouldn't it work for us?
It doesn't work well for them in many places, and we are the backstop for most of those countries. As you know, we're a neighbor to Canada. Canada has such a plan. When they have a problem in Canada that they can't take care of, they come here. In fact, they come to Rochester, or they go to the Mayo in Arizona. We're the backstop for their system.
We go to India to get our knee replacements done.
That's right.
There you go.
Because it's cheaper there. Because we can't handle it here. We may have the technical, but we can't afford it. We can't afford ourselves. Our system has become so cumbersome that we can't afford ourselves.
Well, I'm arguing that that system